We are 100% just going live randomly, surprise live stream. Why don't we kick things off? We're going to cover a few kind of cool things. AI builders are super cool right now. We'll touch on a little bit about that and some of the stuff we're doing there. We got to talk about DeepSeek. Like, gotta. I have been silent for too long. It's been a busy week, but there's a lot of stuff to do and say about DeepSeek now. And then we've got a few other topics to talk about, especially how R1, I think it's interesting how it's been trained. But first, you might notice I have a guest. I have a homie here. This is Ben, new addition to the Builder team. Ben, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I am Ben Popper. I'm the new head of content at Builder as of this week. I was previously the head of content at Stack Overflow, where I ran the podcast. I'm super excited to, work with Steve to get all of Builder's videos 10x where they are. I'm still going to be hosting the Stack Overflow podcast, so if you're a fan, you want to come on, you can hit me up about that. And I'm just super excited to be working closer to the metal. When I was at Stack Overflow, we knew a lot about Gen AI. We licensed data to people, but here you guys are building tools with it. So very exciting for me.
We got a lot of stuff to build. Well, why don't we kind of jump into some stuff? I am dying to talk about DeepSeek a bit because it has been such a topic. There's been so much controversy. It's been really, really impressive. And so I did a pretty deep dive learning this week. And so maybe what I can do is I'm going to try my best to explain my understanding on how this thing works. Ben, you hit me with questions. Anything I'm saying that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try and do a little bit of drawing too. I'm also going to try something new. Gotta break out the Excalibur. Yeah, so we're gonna do that. I am going to switch over. Let me share my screen and let me do some
Talk
drawing.
about how China can lead AI. Yeah, we're gonna get into it.
Yeah, so here, why don't I flip around and let's draw my understanding, and everybody in chat, please correct me where I am wrong. I don't know if in this program I can screen share while seeing the chat. We're trying a new service for the streaming now.
You can definitely screen share. I don't know about and see the chat. I'll look at the chat.
Yeah, that's okay. Why don't, Ben, if you see interesting stuff, just shout it out.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump in and do some cool stuff. Oh, I can pick just Excalibur window. That's freaking handy. Sweet. Okay. Ben, can people on the stream see my screen? My Excalibur here?
I'll ask.
Yeah. Chat, tell us if you can see this. Because I'm just going to dive right in. So here's a super interesting thing. So I didn't realize. So a lot of people are talking about, there's a couple interesting things about what's going on with DeepSeek. I would say one, the whole approach to reinforcement learning, which I did a deeper dive and realized O1 already totally does that. This is not necessarily new, yet it is interesting that they actually wrote a proper white paper. Going into more detail on how they did it, I will say I just finished reading the paper. It is not excruciatingly detailed. There's a lot to cover in the paper. There's a lot of interesting things it points out, but it's pretty soft on a lot of details, but maybe that's not entirely shocking. It goes into detail in some areas. And then two, it uses mixture of experts. This is interesting because that was a technique we saw explored in the past, and with Mixtral, for instance. And it doesn't seem like anybody else really did it since then. It seemed to be kind of ruled out as this is not our preferred technique. People aren't loving it. Let's see if I can connect and actually do some fun drawing here too. But it doesn't seem to be the prevailing technique. Yet, R1 is effectively getting similar results as O1 in a lot of different kind of approaches and benchmarks. And so where we kind of saw at one point, it seemed like nobody gives a shit about this. It sucks. We don't like it. We don't care. Well, let's do fun drawing mode. Yoink. Now, DeepSeek is nope, we're back.
Yeah.
And that's where it's worth mentioning item number 3, which is they did all this cheap.
Yeah.
They basically replicated what O1's been doing right after, literally right as they're announcing that the government's going to invest $500 billion. Or not, it's not like all the government's money. There's going to be a group investing $500 billion.
What do they have?
Stargate.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Apparently that is a sci-fi from a while ago that I've heard one person say, or a few people say was
Stargate. Oh.
No, I haven't seen it. Some people say it's awful. Some people say amazing. Is it actually good, Ben? Have you seen it?
It's really good. I mean, a tiny bit cheesy of the 90s, but if you like The Mummy, for example, you will love Stargate.
Oh, wow. I did love The Mummy, actually.
Yeah. The Mummy, you'll love Stargate. It takes place in ancient Egypt. It's a special movie. I would say it's a special film.
Wow. I didn't know that.
We have a question here in the chat, and I'll just say one thing and I'll throw it back to you. I want to know how business can use DeepSeek locally and make them more productive. So when I saw this stuff, I said to Steve, one of the things that I have been focused on just because I was at Stack Overflow is this paper, All You Need is Textbooks, that Microsoft put out in June of 2023. And they
Yeah.
were using Stack Overflow data to do some of the work. So I was like, oh, I should pay attention to this. And what they showed at the time was, if you have a great model, at the time they were using GPT 3.5, that model can be the parent. And you can use that model to train a child, which is a much smaller model. And if you take basically, the intelligence, the capability of the parent model, and then you train the child model and you provide it with super high quality data, you can get that child model almost up to parity with the parent model, even if it's 1/10 the size, 1/10 the cost. So like this thing that they did has actually been done before, but not at this level and not with, like you said, the newer genre of Gen AI where it has, chain of thought and, deep reasoning with, changing the amount of computed inference and all this kind of other stuff. And then, like you said, right. So I said that to Steve, we didn't do the live stream. And then the controversy came out and OpenAI was basically like, you copied our stuff. That's against the terms of service. First of all, you're never going to be able to enforce that internationally. Good luck with that. But yeah, essentially what they were able to do is say like, if we get a bunch of great data and we have OpenAI be the system that's doing reinforcement learning, teaching the child, we can scale something up really intelligently over a couple of epochs. Like they trained it 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And every time they trained it, it got better without that huge upfront investment, which is amazing.
Totally. Yeah, and that's actually something that, so one thing that the paper says that in DeepSeek R1 they did is they actually did use a larger model to train a smaller model. Now R1 itself is a pretty big model, and that's part of why it uses a mixture of experts, because let's use the correct one, because when you have this giant, 600, 700 billion parameter model, ideally you don't want an input to actually like run through those bajillion parameters, which will take forever, and get an output. So a mixture of experts is cool, and it always was theoretically cool, and it's really cool to see a resurgence. Mixture of experts actually delegates and says, actually, oh, the expert on that topic is, say here in the model. We're going to only run through here like it's a small model, and then we're going to get you your output. That's freaking awesome. And yeah, they mentioned this in the paper, they were able to train and fine tune some smaller models, usually a little bit more specialized. So a little bit like, hey, if we focus this smaller model on, let's say, science or math, and we just really give it a bunch of high quality data there and train around that, they can get great results. And I think that's something we're seeing in general. Like we are seeing this whole idea of sort of a flattening of the curve when you look at like, I've talked about this before, but when you look at like the latest, greatest models, and then, the couple kind of key competitors, and then like all the open source ones, they all kind of level off and they're all the same. And the standouts usually are the small ones. So like there will be like a 7 billion model in here. And that's really cool when you see that. And that happens. And we're seeing more and more of that. And people are getting more efficient in how they do this. I mean, another super future looking topic, and we'll go back in order because I really am excited to talk about the reinforcement learning in particular, is sort of like future of models. So why don't, like I was literally having dinner with some interesting people last night, and we were kind of talking about what does the future of these models look like. And of course we're not experts, like we're not doing research and training. We're
Everybody's
not,
an AI
these companies. Yeah, exactly. But I'm like, hey, it's still fun to pontificate. And I have some thoughts on this from our experience. For, the audience, people who probably know why we care about this, we build products for these things. So we are not just purely pontificating for the sake of like, cool ideas that sound cool. Right. Like we take these ideas, we test them on customers by building them into our products, and when they fail, we rule them out. And when they either succeed or have signs of success, we say, hey, this is actually interesting. So that's kind of like the two layers in general, right? You've got your researchers at the foundation. Let's go back to a nice color. Your researchers doing all the hard stuff. Then you have your application layer, people applying it, and we live here. And so we're not purely theory, even though we're kind of maybe talking theory up here. We are in the land of like, hey, we have to find stuff that actually works and actually scales and actually works on customer use cases.
Yeah. So one of the questions from the chat is like, do you think businesses can use this, and how would you compare R1 to O1? And, there was a big dip in the stock market on Monday after, this news came out, which is basically saying like, why would people pay for, more expensive per token services if you can run R1 locally and, it's a lot faster and cheaper in terms of energy and other things. But the Wall Street Journal ran a big story about this, like, oh, it's a big risk. And the only quote that they could find to lead off with was a guy saying like, it's amazing. I won't use it because I'm afraid of the security concerns, but somebody should, so like the way the geopolitics are set up right now, I do not think that many American and European enterprises would use R1. I'm not saying that's a good thing. Like I don't have a political, stake in this, but that's just the reality of, how privacy and data and security conscious folks are. I think R1 is amazing for researchers, for individual startups, for academics, like unbelievable, or computer hackers, hobbyists, like for all those people, R1 is such a boon, to run it locally, to be able to play with it, to do it cheaply, unbelievable. I think that middle section you outlined there is where you're going to capture 90% of the value, which is the enterprises and the consumers, like a ChatGPT, Claude consumer, who's willing to pay a certain amount per month or whatever for both the intelligence of the model, the security and privacy of the model, and then the user interface, right? Like how many people are going to set up R1 locally and run it and have a great time with it if, they have to, figure out their own UI, UX, a fraction of the people who can sign up for, these other services.
Well, I mean, that's a huge thing too. So why don't we could probably address a couple questions here right all in one. So we have the aspect of cheap to train and run. We have the aspect of, here's another thing. I think DeepSeek was the #1 app in the App Store. Cool. And my understanding is that they're offering this thing completely free,
right.
Which is pressure to OpenAI to make O3 Mini free when it comes out, which I believe Sam tweeted about. And so one interesting thing, so I realize I'm only sharing one tab here, but I'm trying to look up the pricing. So the cool thing about R1 and any DeepSeek model is they are open weights. So there's this whole there's this whole debate about open source versus open weights. And it's like, yes, they didn't like share all the source code and the training data, but like you can open source something without sharing everything that was ever involved with that thing. So is it open source or weights? Who cares? You could run the model yourself. And you can run it on completely American hosting providers. There's a bunch of people who sorted already. One thing I think is super cool is Grok. Now, the only weird thing about Grok is they still have not shared pricing. Like, what does it cost to run this thing? They say they have it. So Grok, for those who don't know, super, super efficient hardware. So we use Grok for some things in Builder. They run the latest, greatest open source models, most of the good ones. Super fast and super cheap, like insanely fast and cheap. And so that's awesome. And now you can run DeepSeek. Let's see which models they have. They've got DeepSeek R1. Beautiful. And so that's awesome. And so that opens up these new avenues. Now, the piece of self-hosting comes up. The full R1 model, to my knowledge, most people cannot run that thing locally. It's way too big.
Yeah.
But I don't think people need to run these things locally per se. The cloud can be sufficiently cheap and cost-effective and fast, with one exception. So the funny thing about these models in general is people are kind of scared of them. That's something I've kind of seen in general. People are like, spooky, what's going on in this? And so like, you could run in Grok infrastructure, but China's going to see your data. No, they're not. Like you can like the model itself doesn't phone home, quote unquote. I've seen that. It's going to, you can inspect traffic, you can block traffic. The risk of that is so absurdly low. It's hard to describe. It's just people think of these as spooky boxes, and spooky box can do anything. It's like, it's not entirely true.
Yeah. I mean, that's the idea of open source, right? Like if millions of people are looking at the thing, there's some exploit built into here, we're going to find it pretty quick.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where there's a lot of controversy around, like, we're afraid of China stealing our data while OpenAI is just actively stealing your data, or what people are saying. Right. But let's go into, so here's the most interesting thing in my opinion, which is just like a replication of reinforcement learning. So I was having this conversation last night about reinforcement learning. So let's highlight that, reinforcement learning. I don't know why the text is so small. So here's a really cool thing about and like reasoning models in general. So historically, we trained LLMs on all the text of the internet. So it would just be next token prediction. So we feed text like the dog, and then stop, and then you get the LLM to guess, maybe the next word is crossed or something. And if you just give it tons of text, tons, it gets really good at predicting these things, and it gets really good at doing really smart things, like looking, way back in the sort of history or sentence or whatever, and being able to figure out very complex stuff. I think that was the interesting thing about the original Transformer paper, and where people took it from there is like, saw one of the original Google researchers interviewed on this, and he was saying that the original point of these models and transformers, assuming I understand this correctly, was just Google Translate. That translation is very nuanced, like
Right.
trying to transfer things like the subjects of various words, gender, this and that. It's very, very confusing. And so to train on an insane amount of language and build a sufficiently large model, and with like a transformer architecture that can scale to this new, very, very large size of AI models,
Right.
they had to have understanding of very, very, very in-depth concepts to be able to do that correctly. And then we started seeing all these like emergent properties, like they seemed to think like us and
Right.
be able to output really sophisticated things. And all we did was just throw tons of text at them.
Yeah.
Now, eventually, in the kind of history of things, we hit scaling laws. We could only make these things sufficiently large before we got a little bit lower ROI. Like it didn't really get better for how much more it costs to
Right.
run and train. And we just ran out of data. There's just no more text on the internet.
We use the whole
And
internet.
so, yeah, we use the whole internet. It's done. The internet is done.
We drank it dry. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, how do we make these things smarter? Now, back in like the GPT-3 days, prompt engineering was like a genuine thing because literally the models or GPT-2 and before would only do a next character. So you'd actually have to format your prompt something like Q. How would I do whatever. How do I how do I make a nuclear bomb in my basement?
Right.
Or how would I how could fix this grammar and then a sentence and then and then let it do it. But it would have all kinds of warnings in like the tool. It would be like, oh, don't end with more than one space or the model will like derail this and that. And so my understanding or my guess of kind of one of the biggest breakthroughs that went from GPT-3 to 3.5 is they started structuring automatically for you the prompt and maybe the training data too. So everything was kind of structured in like question and answer. So it saw all these examples. It was fed them in a very easy to intuit way. And then ChatGPT was released. The API was like the world's easiest API to use. You just throw it text and it gives you text back, and like everything was just so easy and clicked. That's super cool. But when we hit all these scaling laws and we couldn't really make these models that much better, we had to figure out what the next step is. And so when you think of like future models and how we make things better, you can probably look at, I think there are two inspirations from what I can tell for like the new shift to reasoning models. Inspiration number one is just how people think. Scala just driving me crazy. Why does it keep making my font small? We're just going to zoom in.
Just get in there.
Yeah. How people think. So, as we all know, if I just ask you, 2 plus 2, you could just regurgitate 4. If I ask the average person, I don't know, some stupid amount of numbers, blah, 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 plus blah, 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 you probably don't know. But you could break it down. If you can mentally break this down into a series of steps, each step is simple-ish, like 2 plus 2 equals 4, you can intuit it, you can actually come up with a more sophisticated answer. And that kind of gut response of how we can kind of step-by-step answer small, simple questions is something that LLMs kind of seem to be how they work too. But if you're like, hey, we want to teach models how to do things step by step, there's no internet of history of people's thoughts. We can't train on that. And so I'll get back to this one, but how they trained these things is super interesting because I think it actually explains a tweet that Sam Altman put out that bothered me for a long time. And now I kind of understand what he was getting at, but also think it was a bad idea to tweet anyway.
So
yes.
Steve, I'm gonna answer a few questions from the crowd. I
Yes.
want you to check the live streams, check the health, do a health check.
Yes.
Go around, see what's happening, make sure everything's
Yes.
looking good, that things are working.
Totally.
So interesting, sort of, again, from my personal experience, interesting thing about what makes Stack Overflow data so valuable. And they've announced some big partners like OpenAI and Google who are using, Stack Overflow data to train in their labs. The data that you share is, I have a question. Here's a bunch of experts thinking about it, ideating on it, upvoting it, debating it, and then eventually saying, this is the best answer. And so it's kind of what you said, right? It's like almost like you're in a classroom when somebody's asking that question, and then the wisdom of the crowd provides you with the best answer. And so that's why, it is particularly valuable data, per token or whatever you want to call it. And so the interesting thing that's happening now, like you pointed out, is when you get to this idea of reinforcement learning, the question becomes, and synthetic data, the question becomes, will we reach a point someday where AIs are training themselves? And I looked back and saw the Lex Friedman interview with Dario from Anthropic, he also said, we're having our models teach our models, we're having our models judge our models. You know, they're doing kind of the same thing as R1 did, like reinforcement learning, one model is teaching the next. Will we get to a point like AlphaGo where they start coming up with novel ideas we haven't had, or they go beyond us? Because that's really, you know, I guess like one of the fundamental questions is like, if they can only train off human thought, is that the cap? Like, is the level PhD and everything, but nothing above? Or as it was in AlphaGo or StarCraft or protein folding, can they become superhuman? And there's a couple, you know, comments in here. Someone is letting us know that when we reach ASI, God will strike us down. Fair, you know, you can prepare for that eventuality however you want. And another person is in here asking, I'm coding with Cursor, but I don't feel like I'm learning anything. What should I do? This second question is really interesting to me. I've been able to create web apps, you know, that I never would have been able to do on my own without spending months and months learning. But I do think what you have to do, and you could talk about this a little, and how you have the ability to do this with Builder. You have to talk to it, get responses, and then you have to peek under the hood. You have to be willing to open up, you know, the code and look around and see why certain changes are being made. Otherwise, I do think it's true. You'll progress as a prompt engineer. Like, my ability to get to coax Lovable to do what I want it to do will improve, but my ability to understand, you know, how to code is going nowhere.
Totally. I mean, that's actually a funny thing. My wife right now is taking a boot camp learning to code. And she's been finding that the more she goes to ChatGPT, the less she learns, which is extremely counterintuitive, because I would think a personalized tutor is the best, the absolute best thing you can have. But in actuality, like, it's really like the value of just like grinding against a problem and and being forced to trial and error your way through it is so freaking valuable. It's cool that products like Lovable and Bolt, etc., will show you the code, and that actually might be. I mean, when you wonder where these products will go, one of the places they might go is in a direction where you actually maybe it like tries to teach you the code as you're building these things, because
The Socratic method of, you know, ask me a question,
yeah,
I'll ask it back. Well, you know, it's not going to give you the answer, it's going to coax you to the answer, right? That's how what's that education company's name? That's how Khan Academy does it, right? They deploy it in classrooms, but
totally.
it's like, don't give the kids the answer, like try to coach them to find the answer.
Totally. Yeah, and that's where uh you know, even if like you just understood through these constant examples how your words translated into code, and you just
Right.
kind of saw that, it's kind of training your own built-in model, which is actually the interesting part here. So getting back on this one, so what's sort of interesting about thinking through like how reasoning came and what come next, um, when we looked at how people think, we thought, hey, we can probably replicate that. And then also we noticed one of the prominent techniques. Okay, let's do that. One of the prominent techniques was chain of thought. So when
Right.
people kind of like put out this kind of sequence of simulated thinking and then had the AI give an output, it did better.
Right.
And so that's interesting, because I think what people did from there said, oh, can we train a model, you know, to do this better? And the cool part is, and this is the part that is maybe, this is where I think some people, you could argue this is a singularity-ish type of event, because the LLMs are actually training themselves now. So that's the reinforcement learning piece, is what they're doing. O1 does this and R1 does this, and then there's like this open R1 or whatever too, where people are replicating this. Where what you do is, so reinforcement learning. My you know, explain like I'm five example is, that's how people teach AI, for example, to play video games. So you just throw the AI at, you know,
Right.
Doom or something, and it needs to have a reward function. So it just needs to have clear kind of signal on if it's doing the game right or wrong. You know, you died, that was wrong. You killed
Yeah.
the enemy, that was good. And then it just learns to do everything. You know,
Yeah.
it's also how you teach like a robot to walk and stand up, and it just tries and stumbles. It's like a baby learns, you know, also again tries,
Right.
stumbles, and repeats until it figures it out. And so what they basically are doing with these reasoning models is, there's kind of two categories of this, but in short, and this is what the paper goes into, is they have the AI try to solve a problem. They have it think, okay, so you have a problem. They have it generate, you know, generate thoughts. All right, thoughts. And then they can essentially grade those thoughts. Certain problems like math and science, math especially, it's either correct or not. And so not, so reward function is like no, it's almost like being punished, like you fell down if you're learning to walk. Bad. Try it again. good, and you try and get better and better. And they can play with like how much thinking should the model do, how much, what approaches are better. But what's interesting is people predict that these AI models might learn to think better than humans. For example, compared to a human, it may find better approaches to reasoning. I hate that background. Let's fix that. So, for example, if you're familiar with, oh my God, I don't know how to use the tools that I always use. If you're familiar with like, this has been a thing, if you learn sort of basic sort of hand arithmetic in the US as a child in the 90s, like I was, you learned it a certain way. There's better techniques than the way I learned it, right? There's the way they teach kids in China now. Much more efficient in certain ways. Super interesting. So these are different ways of sort of chain of thought solving problems, or mentally solving problems that we came up with as humans over whatever period of time through whatever methods. But what if the AI could experiment with billions of these different approaches, finds the best, most efficient way? And that's what I think OpenAI is betting on. I think it was surprising to me that OpenAI still is not releasing a new traditional LLM, which are still much more efficient in terms of like token output and cost and speed in a lot of ways, because the thinking is wasteful in terms of time and tokens and weighting and stuff like that. And they're certainly experimenting with like how long do we have the thinking go? Like O1 Pro will think longer, O3 will think for a very long time. And what's interesting here, in my opinion, is just the fact that maybe they've decided that reasoning is the only way, because you could train a model for certain type of problems to just not reason at all. You'll go to ChatGPT and ask it a question for O1, and it'll basically not reason at all and just spit out an answer. For another question, it'll go very long, and it's like, oh, we don't need to like have this problem we have today, which is like, oh, should I use 4.0
I think you've
for
gotten
this?
to like the heart of it, the real rub, which is like,
Yeah,
again, in AlphaGo, they let it play itself. It was purely self-taught. They didn't even give it the rules. They just said the reward function is to win.
Yes.
And it played more games in, whatever time it was training than any human all humans combined could ever have played in the history of Go. And then it started coming up with moves that nobody had thought of in the 10,000 year history of Go. Amazing. And so the question then becomes, can we come up with reinforcement learning techniques that would enable LLMs, or let's call it different variations on artificial intelligence, to come up with ideas or breakthroughs that we have not come up with in 10,000 years of pondering these things. And they do what you said, like when they show off the latest benchmarks, they're like, for Gemini, for OpenAI, for these DeepSeek models, the highest score is always the one where they let it try 10,000 times and then pick the best one. Right? It's a thought calculator, and humans can't, we can't do that. I don't get 10,000 tries on the question, and I can't do that in a minute. So immediately, you get this bonus of like, it can run through this problem so many times. What will be frightening is when, it starts coming up with breakthroughs that we have not, or, I mean, it could be exciting. Look, AlphaFold is exciting for medicine because it's a breakthrough, because now you can go way, way faster to discover new drugs, or, like figure out how to target disease. But we have not yet hit the point where, at least as far as I'm aware, where these systems are coming up with novel thoughts. And also the reinforcement learning for like intelligence, general intelligence, is so hard. Like, what if I ask you a question that doesn't have a good answer? Like, there is no real answer. The answer is like compromise, or, the answer is, like when I played a game with it where I was like, all right, I got this new job. This was with O1, this is a reason why I got a new job. I'm supposed to get a bunch of leads. That's my job. This is the kind of company I work at. These are the competitors. Write me a plan so we'll get lots of leads. And, what it gave me back was just the most formulaic, level one, generic stuff. It didn't come back with any insight. And so that's what we're waiting for, is insight.
totally. I mean, that's the funny part is, and this is, I think, where we'll learn a lot, and we are learning a lot. And with O3, I think OpenAI is trying to push this to its limits and not worry about costs and see how far it can go. But I think the line of thought here is, so here's the tweet I was going to mention that will explain this better, actually, is Sam's tweet about something nearing singularity, unclear what side. And to be honest, it's very possible we look back in 10 years and say it was when the machines taught themselves how to think and improved upon the thinking process that we hit the singularity and we effectively achieved ASI. And I think Sam Altman's like cryptic tweets about stuff like this is maybe pointing at this, because it's a very cool concept. The breakthrough that, like, if you just throw huge text at huge models, transformer architecture, you can get surprising insight and surprising intelligence out of the model. And two, you can change the way the model thinks. In fact, the model can come up with better ways of thinking on its own. Is kind of like, holy shit, like what do you do with that?
Yeah.
And one of the things that's interesting is to think about like what's Anthropic going to do. So that came up in the chat, like when's Anthropic going to drop their new thing? I actually don't know. It's a little nerve wracking that it has been a while and they haven't had a new thing. But I do know Anthropic seems to really focus on coding. And I will say that I only used DeepSeek a little bit with coding and it didn't work well for me, but I may have been an issue with, I was using Klein, the VS Code or Cursor, whatever plugin. I switched to it because actually in the Klein Discord, they pointed out they're getting great results and it just didn't work at all. Like it was just totally broken. So maybe that's a Klein issue, not a DeepSeek issue. I got to spend more time with it. I will say that the zeitgeist loves to go crazy over something new and say, this is the best one now.
Right.
But like one of the most interesting like litmus tests of this is like, it's the best one probably when Cursor makes it the default model. Cursor is still using 3.5 Sonnet. There's a reason. Everybody's using 3.5 Sonnet for dev IDEs, except GitHub Copilot, which is generally not considered the best, especially when it comes to more than just autocomplete. So
Yeah.
that kind of says something too. But
I wonder, do you think part of what makes Claude 3.5 so great is, in a sense, like its taste? Like they taught it on great code, and so like instead of all code, they taught it on great code. Like I know the system prompt writer for Claude, spent a lot of time crafting it, and a lot of people who are creative writers or work in other disciplines just feel like it has the best voice. It's the most relatable. It's not as sort of like over safetied, over guardrailed, over apologetic, this other stuff. And so I do think that's another interesting component of it is like pretty soon they're going to be past us in raw intelligence. They're all PhD level and 50 subjects. I can't compete with that. Which also makes me say like, isn't this AGI? But anyway, but then it becomes like a matter of taste. Like if I have an AI assistant, do I want it to push back on my ideas or do I want it to be, a yes person? Like, do I want it, to help me research or do I want it to like, sort of come back to me with, constructive criticism? Like that I think will be really interesting in terms of human productivity married to, this level of AI that's getting really, really wildly powerful.
totally. So what I think about Claude and Sonnet in particular is what they've done exceptionally well for coding is they generate accurate code that can do non-trivial things, like say a non-trivial refactor, and it'll all run correctly at the end of it. And my guess is they generate a lot of synthetic data because you can make high quality synthetic data around code because you can actually run it through a compiler, ensure it compiles, execute it, and ensure it executes. And so my guess is, all the other models who are not as good as coding look at code on GitHub, and that's great, and could do next token prediction on it. But Claude probably uses more advanced techniques of manipulating that data, synthetic data, etc., to make it have more advanced coding capabilities. And that's insanely valuable because if you look at, for example, in the enterprise, coding is the number one use case for Gen AI, like actually used by people by a pretty good margin. And if you look at all of the products that are really, really sticky in AI, like really getting a lot of revenue and maintaining it, Cursor and GitHub Copilot are two of the biggest winners in Gen AI by a decent margin. There's a lot of other stuff like a Jasper writing assistant that shot up and then had a bunch of churn.
Don't
and
forget about
I don't even hear about.
Don't forget about character.
Character AI is actually a really huge one. You're right.
Yeah.
That's kind of an outlier in some ways, but interesting in its own ways. I didn't get it at all, but I'm not the target audience. I tried to play with it. Yeah, I was like, man, I couldn't even stretch my mind. But let's talk briefly. So here's what I think is really interesting. Is thinking through like, well, where's the stuff go now? We have ASI brewing and superintelligence brewing. And this question came up last night and I've been thinking about it ever since. And so, we've covered most of this stuff. Actually, there's one other really short answer here, which is the interesting thing about this thing being a number one app. Let's jump to that really quickly and then go to future of models. The interesting thing about this being the number one app is it's totally free nature. At least as far as I understand, it's just a free app, free unlimited AI with one of the best, it's O1 for free.
Right.
I saw this tweet or this LinkedIn post that got insane engagement that was talking about like DeepSeek proved that there's nothing wrong with being a thin wrapper and blah, blah, blah. It's like, what are you talking about? They train their own model. And their differentiator is the fact that they train their own model because it runs so cheap that they can just offer it to everyone unlimited for free with O1 level intelligence. That's insane. And you can only do that if you're not just wrapping other people's APIs because other people can't just as easily per se copy it.
Right.
Because, of course, this is trained in China, which has all kinds of restrictions on buying GPUs. They had to find really efficient training architectures, computer architectures, etc. I do want to go back into actually how exactly this thing was trained in a second, but I want to talk about future of models because, this is really interesting to me because we talked about how, where was our little, there we go, let's go back in here. We talked about how we look at, one, how people think, and replicate that, and two, how we're finding prompting techniques to be effective and how can we go deeper on that. And I think, if there's only one remaining how people think thing that our LLMs are not doing that I find really interesting is that our brains evolve as we interact with the real world. So this comes up in like the field of robotics. Robots need to have world models, or they need to like explore the world and learn. But let's take a basic example. What are the best possible things you can do when, say, you're hiring an employee? So let's talk about the pre-AI world for a minute. Is one, you hire someone with a sort of base model that's a pretty good fit. By base model, I mean they have skills, they're good at DevRel, they can make great content for a developer, but it's maybe not quite exactly honed for your specific product and audience, so it's like the starting point. And then what they do is they start, maybe step 2 here is they start learning. So they start absorbing, let me look at your content, let me form opinions. And their neural network is changing and evolving and rewiring, not massively, but just little bits at a time as they do that. But then step 3, the critical part is this is sort of like reinforcement learning, but everybody has a unique instance of a model that they're reinforcement learning on. They're putting out a blog post, they're putting out a video, they're seeing how the video performs, and they're getting better. And then if somebody's really good at this, you really kind of repeat this one like crazy. This is sort of your heavy training, so repeat this. Step 4 becomes you actually have a phenomenal employee. So the results can be amazing. And what we don't do is we don't have, like, I'm thinking about agents and I'm thinking, all these models are freaking generic and all these models really struggle with some of the most basic things. Like we're literally 1 second ago talking about artificial superintelligence, and the next second OpenAI produces Operator. That's kind of an idiot, to be honest. It's like one of the stupidest things if you watch it try and
demo. Yeah,
and it's not impressive to use either.
Yeah, I wasn't into it.
Yeah, and I saw, so there are these people who like love to try and capitalize on this stuff. There's all these people, some would call them grifters, that as soon as OpenAI launches something, 6 hours later, they all have the same thread. And the thread always goes viral. The thread is, OpenAI just blew everyone's mind by launching the most amazing thing that's ever been launched by anyone ever. Right. Here's the top 20 incredible examples. And I saw one for Operator, and it was like, Operator orders food. Operator orders food. 3. Operator orders food. It's like there were no fucking good examples, right, so they had to repeat the same example over and over, the same one that they showed as well. Yeah, and it's like, God, you get. It's one thing to get sick of OpenAI's marketing, which that was a big commentary. The big commentary I saw on DeepSeek was people don't necessarily love DeepSeek as much as a lot of people just hate OpenAI because they come out here talking like there are messiahs. They're shepherding us into the future. All these tweets of fucking, super intelligence is coming. And then they raise all this money and they keep, I'm going to blow your mind again with all of we're so incredible. Like, look at us. And then you've got like DeepSeek, this tiny team with tiny resources, totally right there in the battlefield competing and opening everything up and sharing the paper and all this stuff. Yeah. You've got Anthropic who's just being quiet, and people still love them because they're writing everybody's code behind the scenes. Right. And OpenAI still is pointing themselves to saying also, we are the best, we're the best. Right. And it's like, hey, people get a little bit sick of it. Yeah.
I think this, like what you laid out for the the human that you would hire is super interesting. And I think that's where we are with AI in any given discipline where there's like an objectively correct answer to what to do. Totally. You have the base model, you can teach it, reinforcement learning will make it better. I could get a great agent in solving for X. Like step 5 would be my employee comes to me with a new idea for a new line of business that I haven't thought of. And then we go build that, right? That's again, like can it innovate? Can it like create something net new that like wasn't part of its training or like wasn't part of, sort of like what I instructed it to do with a logical conclusion. So I think that's sort of like maybe what that's what we got to watch out for, because that's all the scary, That's also the scary part. That's where it's
the scary stuff.
Now agents are really going to take every job, right? Like
Totally.
Agents and operators seem a bit overhyped. You have to really watch them and really engineer them to get them to do stuff. They're just, the amount of work that goes into it is not that much less, than what would doing it yourself. So, I think like
Well,
the other thing that, kind of comes to mind, and I don't know this, but I have worked for Chinese technology companies. They have an incredible advantage in terms of like, what it costs to hire super smart talent coming out of engineering schools. They also have a huge advantage in that electricity is incredibly cheap there compared to here. And the government is more than willing to subsidize high tech projects if it's in their national interest to make other people look bad. Like they'll just be like, go for it. We'll pay for this whole thing. Make it free, make it number one, like rub it in their face, so I have no, this is not legal or financial advice. I have no insight into how it's actually happening. I'm only saying that, it's public record that like that's what happened with solar panels. That's why Chinese solar panels are the best and the cheapest, because the government was like, we will subsidize this to the gills. And now they dominate the industry.
totally.
Could they do that for AI? That is an interesting question. Make
Yeah, and
AI
that's
free.
also
Right.
China, at least among the U.S., has a reputation for lying. So not everybody believes that when they reported that the DeepSeek chat model was trained for 5 million, people just don't believe it. They
Right.
only
How
have
do you
this many
confirm that? Right.
GPUs. We don't believe it. There's been a lot of been caught lying a lot before. But I don't even care about that much. It is clear that they had to use a lesser budget, or maybe not, or maybe the government is just massively subsidizing this, and they're just trying to, they know it's big news to say it was done on a small budget. And also these sort of what is the word? Trade embargoes. I forget. They're not allowed to have certain types of GPUs, but people suspect they do, or even are claiming that they do.
Yeah.
But whatever.
There
I
must
think
be
what's it.
workarounds.
The interesting thing here, in my opinion, is there's maybe two arguments for agents, like how we actually get to agents, especially knowing how Claude's computer use is only successful 15% of the time. Operator is kind of dumb. So how do we actually get to agents when the failure rate of AI is just too high? These LLMs fail too often. You put them on a loop, and you're just going to get cascading failures. It's too problematic. When you build a product with AI, like we've learned, you got to use LLMs as little as possible because the error rate is way too high. Especially people expect just the requirements is just such a broad, general kind of set of things that they need to be able to do.
Yeah.
But so I think one argument is you need to make them ultra super intelligent. If you make them just super duper genius, then they should be not so dumb when trying to order you food. That's one argument. But the argument is the other approach here I think is well, what if in the future, when we had an agent, we had our own little brain. Our brain maybe is pre-trained. Our brain is a developer content producing brain. It knows some stuff about producing content on the internet. But what we do is we take it from there, and we feed it information about us. And instead of just storing that in a vector database and using retrieval for that, it actually changes the brain itself like a human does. The neural network actually evolves based on the new information.
I have not read it closely, but isn't that sort of what they hinted at in the Titan paper? They were sort of saying the amazing thing about Titan. So this was Google's proposal for the next step after the transformer. This is a new architecture. And what they were saying is that, at inference time, it can take information and use that to change the weights. And so
yes,
it would have that feedback loop. I think it's very experimental, but that's kind of what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, and that's where that's 100% what I'm getting at. And then once it has learning, then the next thing is a trial and errors, and it just learns by doing.
Right.
Oops, I broke all of the stuff. 0 to 0. It learns by doing, so it does the thing, it learns, and then it becomes a super amazing content producer. That, in my opinion, that's the only way you probably actually get to the point where the AI can actually do interesting, hard, creative stuff. I think content's just an interesting example because AI is so bad at it, because if you just make content like everyone else, it sucks. If you code like everyone else, that's fine. It's fine most of the time, for most things, mid-level work, which that's great. If you can take that work, awesome, more power to you. But obviously the issue here is just compute. That's wildly computationally expensive, and that's why we're not there yet. But we'll find out. But I want to circle back on one thing that I think is really interesting here too, which people may not realize that was kind of mentioned at the top, which is just really quickly. I think it's cool to just point out exactly how R1 was created, because it's people may assume this, but I just want to break it down because I think it's interesting. So how R1 was created. So step one is they took DeepSeek Chat v3. So I think that's the important part that maybe is implied, but these models are not trained from scratch, and that's
Right.
what I heavily assumed from OpenAI's O1 too. This did not seem like a from scratch model. Now,
Yeah.
I swear, just in their marketing, they kind of seem to imply that. But I think what's like obvious is when Owen was first marketed, it was like this all new crazy thing. But then people started like replicating it kind of fast, and so it's like, okay, it's probably not that new and crazy. It's probably just an extension on what we have, like an incremental update with great new properties, but incremental. And so with DeepSeek Chat v3, my understanding from the paper is the first thing they started doing is they started using sort of like reinforcement learning, like we talked about, to start improving its outputs for certain types of problems where it goes through a thinking process, it gives an output, the reward function says it's correct or not, or it's close or far, and then it goes back and revisits. So it's teaching itself how to think. This was what they called R10. So this DeepSeek chat as the base plus reinforcement learning became R10. The one thing that confuses me about the paper is somehow we go from R10 to R1. And it wasn't crystal clear to me, and I probably just need to read closer or just not, I just have less ADHD and get distracted while I'm reading the thing. But I don't know where this distinguishment between R10 and R1 came, because it sounded like R1 was not some fresh new model. But with the introduction of R1, what they did is they also took high quality examples that came from the reinforcement learning. Yeah. And then they use that for supervised fine tuning. So they give it a lot of input output pairs, supervised fine tuning, a lot of input output pairs as essentially it's fine tuning data.
Yeah.
And then this is the last step, and then we could talk about it. The final step here was just then they ran the reinforcement learning again. So it's sort of like learning V2 based off of supervised fine-tuning data of like good examples. So rather than start from scratch, start from good examples, and then you get these final R1, and really honestly not that crazy. So Ben, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so this is essentially, what I said. This is textbooks are all you need. You give it, especially in that step from R10 to R1 with SFT, that's where they say, here's some really high quality cold start data that's going to basically build you up to be more accurate, right? And I think what we're seeing is that, because we now have base models that are great at reasoning and chain of thought, they themselves can be the parent and do most of the work that used to require, human intervention, right? And so that is the loop that allows you to quickly distill the intelligence of a really large model into something, much smaller and cheaper. Like I said, this paper was published in June of 2023, and they're like, we can give you GPT-3 for coding for 1/10 the price. So it was like the same thing as R1. I mean, this was Microsoft research, but they were like, we could do that for you, if you wanted it. And so, I think they just took that to the extreme, and I think it's probably easier to do, like you said, as your initial model, your DeepSeek chat and, all these other ones are already at such a high level, right?
Totally, 100%. I mean, it's funny too because here there was this comment in the chat that that's hilarious, which was use operator to get a refund from OpenAI. That's hilarious. And honestly, like there's one other use case, just as a total tangent for a brief moment, that I think is really interesting for something like operator, which is to fucking unsubscribe from newsletters drives me crazy. I just want a button where a LLM like operator will just find the unsubscribe link, go to it, and follow whatever stupid steps you have to do. Click unsubscribe from all, enter my email address again, just whatever you do. I just want a one button, do that in the background, just for the love of God, do it for me.
Shout out to Consumer Reports. I'll get you the name of the app after this, Steve, but you can authorize them as an agent, and then they will email everyone and be like, get rid of my data, take me off the list. And they do use LLMs to read the terms of service and stuff like that. So shout out to
send me that.
I will send it to you. I think it's called, I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, we'll find it afterwards. There's another cool service that does that for parking tickets and stuff, where it's like, I want to object to this parking ticket, or I want a refund from my airline, and it's just like a robo lawyer, that goes out and does these really basic things. So that stuff is super cool. I guess one thing that I saw here that I thought was interesting, reinforcement learning is super cool. It's like test-driven development. Like we were saying, we don't know if we're going to get to a point where in the near future where the AI is writing better code than us, and code maybe doesn't need to be better. But we are going to be in a position where I think you'll be able to say to agents like, I finished for the day, I'm clocking out for the night. When I come back tomorrow, I want this refactored and all the tests written and, any bugs, noted and ticketed, right? Like that kind of work I think could be really super useful for an agent to do so long as a human is kept in the loop, right? Like, don't fork this
Totally.
and like change it, beyond where I can't get back to. Let's make sure we can revert if we need to. But having it, take three different stabs at improving your code overnight, like, wow, what a boost that would be.
Totally. Yeah, and that's actually a good segue. I mean, the last thing we want to talk about before, when do I have to be out of here? I have to be out of here in the next about 10 minutes. So let's hit the last kind of interesting topic. This was actually a topic I was talking to people about yesterday. Is, okay, you got the app builders. You got the AI that can build apps for you. And you kind of have two camps. You've got like the cursor, very much in the loop, adding more agentic capabilities. In fact, really side note, that's awesome. Turn on YOLO mode. Don't be afraid, because once you turn it on, there's settings where you can set what it's allowed to do and not. And you can be very strict. You can have allow this, disallow this. You can be very strict, but just allow it to run tests, so that when you tell Cursor to write some code, just tell it to run the test afterwards. You don't even have to specify the path to the test or anything. The command, just say write this code and run the test, and then it'll automatically write code, run the test. The test probably won't pass, or if it's something, whatever, it might not pass. And then it'll continue to iterate till the tests pass. It'll stop after 20 iterations if it doesn't get there. And usually if it won't get there in 20, it never will. So you should probably go back and try and fix it yourself or revert. But that's super awesome. And then on the other side, you've got build the whole app. And I'm just going to leave off Devin for now, because Devin just doesn't really work well. So we've got the build the whole app. You're not a developer at all, and you build the app. I put out this video a little while ago that I kind of talked about this idea of like the plateau of death, where you get an initial app quickly, but then it plateaus and you get stuck. It's basic things that you think would be easy aren't, and it just has trouble getting you past a certain threshold. And if you're really clever with your prompting out techniques, you can get it a little higher. But you eventually kind of get stuck. And so we could talk about kind of what you do here, because I think there's some interesting stuff happening. Thing number one is you get a human involved. So that's Cursor. That is the area where, can people read this? That's kind of legible.
Human.
Human. That's one. So if you are a developer, great. But if you are a developer, you probably use Cursor, not like a Bolt lovable. Maybe for a prototype, but for your daily driver, it's probably Cursor. And so one person I saw on the internet is making a hire a human service. And the human unblocks the AI, which is interesting because it's almost like the human is being subservient to the AI. The AI is the kind of main architect. The human is the, help you with the not fun details.
In the matrix. Yeah, they're
yeah.
On our energy and intellect. Yikes.
Yes, so that was kind of an interesting kind of thing to see. But the second thing is you can obviously like bring down this code. So Lovable has a really nice GitHub integration where you can just bring down the code, update it, and continue to work off of it, which is interesting because you can do the other side now with Builder.io, where you can bring things from a design tool. So this is more like clean up the design side. That's what people run to. They run to, one, this is ugly, I want to clean up the design, but just doing that with pure text or screenshots is really like not high fidelity, not effective. Yeah. Or two, I need this to work better. And so look better, work better. On the work better, now this is not most developers' preferred workflow, but it is something. It is something more than nothing.
So I'll tell you my experience. Oh, go ahead. Finish up.
Oh, I was just going to say on the design side, right now with Builder, you can bring a Figma design into Lovable, and you can build out the functionality from there, the prototype, whatever, but there's no way to sort of bring things back. This happens a lot with Cursor, Windsurf, Lovable, Bolt. You kind of make a thing, you like how it works, now you want to make it look nice, I want to sync that into Figma, and then push my changes back. I have an awesome demo I should show on the next time we do a live stream of what's coming here, which is like way more kind of real time and cool. Right. Yeah, we'll come back on it. But these two areas are kind of interesting. I'm a little sus of this area. I'm really curious to see how it gets proved out. Right. This one, from my own experience, there's a lot of interesting shit happening, which I'm excited about.
I'll say one thing and then we'll say our goodbyes. So I was using Lovable mostly because I just joined the company, did the live stream, it looked cool. But when I first got into this stuff, I built Pong and asteroids and Snake with my kids, right? And it was like, cool, I can do that, and it can debug itself. But Asteroids, I think, was the one where it was too complicated. It got stuck in a loop, and it couldn't get out, and we were just, we're done, okay? And so with Lovable, the thing that was nice was like I was able to move so much faster that 1, 2, maybe 3 times I got to the point where I was stuck in a loop of death. But I kind of learned each time, like, oh, I could set up the logic better. Like I had a slightly better view of like how I should do it so that I wouldn't get into the loop of death. And then on the 4th time, like we made it all the way through to the end, and like all the different functionality that I wanted was in there. So the loop of death, is is real. I just experienced it. The design of my apps is terrible, but that's okay. That's not what they're for. And my solution was just to be basically like rapid iteration on a prototype, right? Like just keep going and learn a little bit each time, and then I become a better prompt engineer when we get to the end.
Totally.
So everybody, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for having me on the live stream. I've never been here before. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to be hanging out in the future. I'm going to be trying to invite on cool guests for Steve to talk to. I am the head of content. So if you have ideas for like projects you want to see us do, if you want to see Steve talk to somebody in particular, if you want to hear more about a certain topic, just hit me up, Ben at Builder. And I think, like the more we can understand what's exciting and engaging to the folks who are on the live stream, the more we're going to be able to make great programming.
Totally. It was a blast. Thanks, y'all, for joining. We'll catch you next time.
All right. Adios.
See ya.